The desert night was a living thing, restless and watchful. The sky stretched endlessly, a black ocean scattered with stars sharp as flint, their light glimmering faintly against the outline of the mesas. Coyotes called to one another in the distance, their cries rising and falling like the chanting of spirits. A thin breeze slid over the sand, tugging at the dry grass and carrying with it the faint perfume of mesquite smoke. A reminder that somewhere nearby fires still burned in the camps of men. It was in this hush, beneath the shelter of a cottonwood tree that bent over the river, that they stood together, two figures drawn together by a force neither fully understood, yet neither dared to deny. He was Apache, his hair long and black, bound with a strip of leather that caught in the wind. His skin was the color of the earth itself, bronzed and weathered by the sun, and his eyes carried a quiet intensity, a weight that came from a lifetime of watching, hunting, waiting. In his tribe he was known as swift of horse and sharp of arrow, a man whose word carried the steel of honor. And yet here, in this moment, none of that mattered. For him, all the world narrowed to the figure standing before him. She was the daughter of a rancher, slender, fair-skinned, her hair catching the starlight like threads of gold. The riverbank dust clung to her dress, but she hardly noticed. Her breath came fast, half with fear, half with something else she was only beginning to recognize. Her people had warned her about men like him, painted them as savages, as thieves of cattle and land. But in his presence, all those warnings seemed like smoke against the truth she saw in his eyes. The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. He stepped closer, so close that the warmth of his breath touched her cheek. His voice, when it came, was low, hoarse with urgency and tenderness all at once. "I'd trade 10 of my finest cattle just to hold you for one night," he whispered. The words were not spoken in jest. In his world, cattle meant wealth, meant survival, meant the honor of his family and the respect of his people. To offer them away, even in a vow, was no small thing. It was an unmasking, a laying down of pride, a confession that she was worth more to him than any possession, any measure of standing. For a moment, she did not speak. Her lips parted slightly, her heart stumbling in her chest as if it too could not find its rhythm. The night seemed to press closer, listening. She thought of her father, who would surely brand this Apache no better than a thief. Of her brothers, who would sooner raise rifles than permit such closeness. She thought of the divide that ran between their worlds, a chasm wide as the desert itself, and yet, beneath the cottonwood, that distance vanished. Her hand, trembling, rose as if of its own accord. She brushed the back of her fingers lightly against his arm, the sinew beneath his skin taut, alive like a coiled spring. She felt the roughness of his scars, the heat of his body. He did not pull away. His eyes searched hers, steady, as though her silence alone might sentence him to despair or grant him reprieve. "You would trade your cattle," she murmured, her voice barely more than the rustle of leaves overhead. "And what then, if all you have is gone?" His lips curved faintly, though not in jest. "Then I would still have the memory of you," he said, "and that would be wealth enough." The girl swallowed, her throat tight. No man of her people had ever spoken to her in such a way, not with honeyed charm, not with empty promises, but with a rawness that felt like truth itself. She had always known her worth measured in dowries, in the weight of land her marriage might bring her father. Yet in this moment, with the Apache's whisper still echoing in her ears, she felt as though she were more than bargaining coin, more than the child of a feud. The night grew colder, but she barely noticed. The stars wheeled above them, patient witnesses to a fragile promise, a confession clothed in the simplest of words. A promise that could ignite something brighter than the campfires burning across the valley or consume them both like dry grass. In a summer blaze, somewhere in the darkness, A branch cracked. A horse stirred. They both flinched, glancing toward the sound, reminded of the danger that lurked in every moment they lingered together. But neither moved away. Instead, he leaned closer still, his forehead brushing hers, and whispered once. More not of cattle, not of trade, but only of her name, as though it alone was the prayer that might keep them safe in the long night ahead. And beneath the cottonwood tree, the river flowing at their feet, they stood caught between two worlds, bound by one whispered vow that neither time nor bloodshed could easily erase. The river marked more than the edge of the rancher's land. To her people, it was a boundary, a warning. On one side lay the grazing fields, fenced and claimed, dotted with cattle that stamped and lowed through the nights. On the other side, beyond the cottonwoods, stretched land the ranchers called wild scrub, and desert that to the Apache was sacred, the veins of their ancestors running through its soil. The river did not care for fences, nor for claims. It ran where it pleased, carving earth, feeding roots, carrying secrets. And it was here, along this shifting border, that the girl and the Apache met. Their first meeting had not been planned. She had gone to the water to gather her thoughts, weary of her father's voice booming about stolen horses and red thieves. The ranch house had been full that day, her brothers arguing over rifles, her mother sewing silently in the corner, trying not to listen. The air had felt heavy, full of suspicion, so she had escaped, slipping out past the corrals where the cattle milled restlessly. She found the river at dusk, its surface painted with the last strokes of sunset. Kneeling, she dipped her hands into the current, startled at its cool bite. When she lifted her eyes, he was there, standing across the water, as though he had risen from the earth itself. At first she had been afraid. She had heard stories whispered around the ranch of raids, of blood spilled under the desert moon. He wore his hair long, his stance proud, and in his gaze was a steadiness she could not decipher. But he had not reached for a weapon. Instead, he had tilted his head slightly, as if she were a deer caught unexpectedly in his path. They had spoken no words that first evening, only watched one another across the narrow stream until darkness claimed the light. And then, without knowing why, she returned the next night. And the night after. Words came slowly, halting phrases at first. For her, Apache was little more than a tangle of sounds she did not yet understand, and his English was broken, uneven. Yet the river was patient, and so were they. She taught him the word cottonwood, pointing to the tree above. He repeated it, his lips shaping the syllables carefully. He told her the Apache name for the bird that called from the branches, and she stumbled through its strange rhythm until he laughed softly. Not unkindly. It was in those stolen moments, day after day, that a bond began to weave itself between them, fragile, dangerous, but undeniable. Each meeting was a defiance. Her father had sworn his land would never bow to Apache claims, just as his tribe had sworn no settler would ever take the desert from them. The ranchers called the Apache raiders. The Apache called the ranchers thieves. To be seen together was to risk being called traitor, outcast, enemy. And still, they came. Tonight, the girl stood with her back to the cottonwood, her heart racing as she waited. Every crack of brush set her nerves on edge, for if it was not him, it could be her brothers. They had grown suspicious of her long walks by the river, their eyes narrowing when she slipped away. If they discovered the truth, they would not hesitate to draw steel. Then he appeared, a shadow peeling itself from the darkness. He moved with the quiet grace of a hunter, each step certain, silent. She exhaled softly in relief. He saw it and smiled, though the smile did not last long. "You should not be here," he said, his English clipped, his tone both warning and invitation. "Nor should you," she answered, though her lips curved despite the danger in her words. He stepped closer, and the distance between them seemed to shrink to nothing. The air felt charged like the silence before a summer storm. His people had warned him as hers had warned her. This path led to ruin. And yet here they stood, choosing ruin over absence. The girl's breath caught as his hand brushed hers, tentative, testing the invisible barrier their worlds had set between them. She did not pull away. The touch was small, fleeting, but it was enough. The night around them thickened, heavy with the knowledge of what they risked. If her father knew, his wrath would fall like a hammer. If his kin knew, they would see betrayal in his eyes. Yet between them, there was no ranch, no tribe, no feud. There was only the whisper of leaves, the murmur of the river, and the certainty that they had found something neither law nor bloodline could command. And so, by the river's edge beneath the cottonwood, their forbidden meeting stretched into the night, a fragile secret held between two hearts, as dangerous as it was unshakable. The girl had known affection before boys from neighboring ranches, who tipped their hats and spoke in practiced tones of cattle prices and harvest yields. They saw her as a part of her father's wealth, a bride who could bind ranches together and grow fields of profit. None had ever looked at her the way the Apache did. His gaze was steady, unflinching, as though he saw not her father's land nor her family's name, but her alone, her laughter, her silences, her very breath. And for him, desire was dangerous still. Among his people, he was a warrior of promise, entrusted with the honor of the hunt and the duty to his kin. To whisper of trading cattle for her, his finest cattle, no less was more than courtship. It was a statement that she was of greater value than the wealth he was expected to protect. That desire, spoken aloud, was enough to unravel trust, to cast suspicion upon his loyalty, yet the desire did not shrink under the weight of danger. It grew. One evening, as the last blush of sun drained from the sky, she stood on the river bank and pressed her hand into his. His palm was rough with the calluses of bowstring and bridle, but his grip was gentle, as if he feared she might vanish like smoke. She leaned closer, emboldened by his warmth. "My father would kill me if he knew," she whispered. His jaw tightened, but he did not release her hand. "My people would call me foolish. They would say I throw away honor." He paused, searching her face. "But still, I come." Her chest ached with the weight of it, how something so tender could feel like rebellion. She lifted her eyes to his, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to fall away. The fences, the rifles, the feud that stretched back before either of them had been born. In that stolen heartbeat, there was only desire, but the world would not let them keep it. Already the air around the ranch carried tension like a storm brewing on the horizon. Cattle had gone missing, and her brothers cursed the Apache with every hoof unaccounted for. One night she overheard her father at the table, slamming his fist until the lantern shook. "If I catch one of those devils near my land again, I'll string him from a cottonwood." The words had chilled her, for she knew the man he spoke of could well be the one whose touch still lingered on her hand. And among the Apache, whispers traveled just as quickly. The young warrior heard them around the fire, talk of poisoned wells, of ranchers who shot at shadows and called it justice. His uncle, an elder with eyes like stone, warned him, "Do not trust the pale-faced girl. They are bait sent to ensnare your heart so you will falter when war comes." But he did falter every time he saw her. He faltered not with weakness, but with want. Desire urged him to cross the river again and again, though every crossing might be his last. The girl too wrestled with her yearning. At night in her narrow bed, she lay awake, recalling the sound of his voice, the way his eyes softened when he spoke her name. She pressed her face into the pillow, torn between terror of discovery and the ache that burned sharper each time she thought of him. Desire was a fire. It could warm them in the dark, or it could burn down everything they knew. And still, they fed it out one night under a moon swollen and white. He drew her against him, his arms wrapping around her as though he could shield her from the whole world. If they knew, she breathed against his chest, they would kill. "US both." His reply was steady, unwavering. "Then let them. I would rather die in your arms than live without this." Her tears came unbidden, hot against her cheeks. For the first time, she understood the true weight of their bond. This was no passing fancy, no secret game of stolen glances. This was a dangerous desire that would demand a price, when neither of them yet knew how to pay dot. And still, as the coyotes cried in the distance and the river rushed cold at their feet, they held each other closer, daring the night itself to take their vow away. The first hints of war arrived not with a battle cry but with whispers. Whispers on the ranch, whispers in the Apache camp. They drifted like smoke, curling into every corner of their lives until neither could pretend not to hear them. At the ranch house, supper was no longer filled with easy talk of weather or cattle sales. Instead, her father sat rigid at the head of the table, his face drawn hard beneath the lamplight. He chewed in silence, jaw working like stone grinding on stone, until suddenly he would slam his cup or fist against the wood and bark about missing horses, broken fences, or tracks found. In the dust, her brothers listened eagerly, their young faces shadowed with anger. They longed for rifles in their hands, for the chance to prove themselves. "The Apaches think they can steal from us," one muttered. "I'll put a bullet in the next one I see." The girl's mother kept her eyes on her stitching, though. Her hands trembled. She said little, but her silence carried its own weight, a silence born not of peace but of fear. The girl felt that fear pressing at her too, like a storm swelling just beyond the horizon. Across the river, the Apache warrior lived the same storm from the other side. Around the fire, his people spoke of poisoned wells, of cattle grazing on sacred grass, of settlers who hunted deer and left bones to rot. His uncle's voice was sharp with fury. "They come like locusts, eating and taking until nothing is left. Do you think they will stop with our horses? No, soon they will take the desert itself." The young men nodded, gripping their bows and rifles with hungry hands. They wanted to ride out at once, to strike before the ranchers struck them. Only the elders counseled caution, their weathered voices urging patience. But patience, like water in the desert, was running dry. For the lovers, every meeting grew heavier. The river no longer felt like a sanctuary but like a knife edge. She arrived with her heart pounding, terrified her brothers had followed. He came with his eyes darting to the shadows, alert for the eyes of his kin. "Your people blame mine," she whispered one night, the moon glinting off her pale face. "My father says the stolen cattle were taken by Apache riders." His eyes flashed, hurt beneath the fire of anger. "And my people say it was your ranchers who poisoned our wells. That children were made sick from water fouled with death." He shook his head. "I do not know who lies, but lies will not matter. Blood will come." Her throat tightened at the certainty in his tone. "And when it comes?" she asked. He looked at her then, not as a warrior, not as a man caught between duty and desire, but as someone already mourning. "When it comes, there will be no place for us." The words struck her like a blade. She reached for him, desperate, her fingers clutching his arm as though her grip alone could keep the world from splintering. "No," she said fiercely. "There must be a place. We'll find it. We'll make it." But even as she spoke, doubt clouded her heart. She had seen the way her brothers cleaned their rifles with shining eyes. She had heard the laughter of Apache youths when they boasted of raids. War was not a storm to be avoided. It was already rolling toward them, vast and unstoppable. Their meetings became rarer, each one riskier than the last. Still, they could not let go. The pull between them was stronger than fear, stronger than reason. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a rebellion. But behind every embrace loomed the shadows of war, growing darker, stretching longer. One night, as they stood beneath the cottonwood, a distant gunshot cracked the silence. She flinched, clinging to him. He did not move, only stared into the darkness with eyes that seemed to see a battle already unfolding. "Soon?" he murmured. "There will be fire on the land. The earth will drink blood." He touched her face, his hand trembling though his voice was steady. "When that time comes, you must choose." She pressed her cheek into his palm, tears burning her eyes. She did not want to choose between family and love, between loyalty and her heart. Yet the night around them seemed to whisper that the choice would come whether she wished it or not. And so they stood together, the river rushing at their feet, two souls caught in the widening rift of war, a war that would test not only their people, but the fragile bond that bound them across the divide. The river's song was softer that night, a lullaby of water slipping over stone. Yet for her, there was no peace in its music. Her breath came fast, uneven, as though the current itself had crawled inside her chest. She pressed her hand against him, feeling the solid thrum of his heartbeat beneath her palm. It was steady, resolute, as if even in the face of war he could not be shaken. She searched his eyes, looking for some crack, some trace of doubt that might match her own. But what she saw was a fire quiet but unyielding, burning with the certainty of a man who had already chosen. "One night," she whispered, her words trembling into the darkness. "You said you would trade 10 cattle for one night. But one night wouldn't be enough." His eyes softened, the fire flickering to warmth. He tilted his head, studying her as though she had spoken something more dangerous than any rifle. Then what would be enough? She swallowed hard, the weight of her thoughts nearly breaking her voice. "If you truly mean it, if you would give up so much, then take me. Take me far from here, where no war can find us." The words startled even her. She had not known she would speak them until they spilled from her lips. But once said, they felt like truth. She could no longer bear the shadows tightening around them, the whispers of blood that drew nearer each day. She wanted only him, his arms, his voice, the steady promise in his gaze. For a long moment, silence lay heavy between them. The night air clung to their skin, cool and restless. A coyote yipped in the distance, answered by another across the valley. He did not speak at once, and her heart sank, fearing she had asked too much, that she had torn their fragile bond with the weight of her plea. But then he drew her closer until his forehead rested against hers. His voice was low, rough with feeling. "To take you from here would mean leaving all I know. My people, my land, the graves of my ancestors." "I know," she whispered. "And for me, it means leaving my father, my mother, my home. But what are walls and fences if they only keep us apart?" She clutched at his hand, desperate. "I cannot live waiting for the gunshot that takes you from me. I cannot live with fear as my only companion." His breath trembled against her hair, and she knew then that her words had reached him, cut through the layers of duty and tradition that bound him. Slowly, his arms tightened around her, not in hesitation, but in a vow. "I will take you," he said at last. "Not for one night, not for 100 nights. I will take you beyond the reach of war, to where the sun rises and no one knows your name or mine, and there we will begin again." Her chest broke open with relief, with joy so fierce it nearly hurt. Tears slipped from her eyes as she pressed her face into his shoulder. "Swear it," she demanded, her voice fierce despite the quiver in it. "Swear it to me now." He lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes gleamed in the starlight, unflinching, unafraid. "I swear it. By the cattle I would trade, by the land that raised me, by the spirits of those who walked before. I swear to take you where no war can reach." The promise hung in the night like a banner, fragile yet unbreakable. The river seemed to carry it away, whispering it downstream so the whole earth might bear witness. She leaned forward then, her lips finding his in a kiss that was no longer stolen, no longer secret. It was fierce, unyielding, sealed not just with desire but with the weight of a vow that bound them tighter than blood. When at last they parted, the night seemed changed. The stars above burned brighter, as if blessing their promise. Yet even as they clung to one another, the girl felt the pulse of urgency. Promises meant little if time ran out. War was coming, and soon their vow would be tested by fire and blood. But she no longer cared for fear. She had her promise, and he had sworn it with every breath in his body. Together, they would carve a path beyond the reach of hatred. Together, they would find a place where their love could live. And in that moment, as the river murmured and the desert wind stirred the cottonwood leaves overhead, she believed that such a place truly existed. The promise had been spoken, sealed with a kiss and the trembling weight of hope. But promises alone could not keep the world at bay. The very next dawn, the world intruded. The girl woke to the sound of her father's voice carrying across the yard, harsh as a whip. She slipped to the window and peered out. Her brothers were gathered near the corrals, rifles cradled in their arms. The cattle shifted uneasily, their hooves kicking up dust, as if they too sensed the storm brewing. "She's gone too often," one brother muttered, "always to the river." "You don't think?" Her father cut him off with a glare. "She's my daughter. She knows better than to consort with savages." His voice cracked with anger, though beneath it lay the unease of suspicion. He turned, scanning the horizon. "Still, we'll watch. The Apaches grow bold. Let them try their tricks. We'll be ready." Her heart thudded painfully. She knew the walls of her secret life were closing in. That night, when she slipped from the house and crept toward the river, she carried more than desire, she carried urgency. The desperate knowledge that time was running out. He was already waiting when she reached the cottonwood, his form cut against the silver wash of moonlight. She ran to him, clutching his hands as if to anchor herself. "They're watching me," she whispered. "My father suspects. If they catch me here," he did not let her finish. "Then we must go now," he said, his tone sharp with decision. "No more waiting. You asked me to take you away. Tonight we leave." The suddenness of it stole her breath. Fear surged of the unknown, of pursuit, of the gulf she was about to leap. But then she remembered his vow, remembered the fire in his eyes when he swore to take her beyond the reach of war. She nodded, her grip tightening. Yes, tonight. They moved quickly. He led her to where his horse waited in the shadows, a sturdy bay with a coat that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. She mounted behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist, and with a soft click of his tongue, the horse surged forward, carrying them away from the river. Away from all they had known, but escape was never so simple. Back at the ranch, her absence was noticed before the night was half spent. Her mother's cry roused the house, and soon her father and brothers thundered into the dark on horseback, rifles gleaming under torchlight. Their shouts split the stillness, carried far across the desert, and across the valley in the Apache camp, eyes too had noticed. A warrior riding off in the night with a pale-skinned girl clinging to him. Such a sight could not go unchallenged. Anger spread like wildfire, and soon riders emerged, bows and rifles ready, following the trail with grim resolve. The lovers became quarry. The desert stretched before them, vast and merciless. The horses' hooves struck sparks on stone as they raced across dry creek beds and winding arroyos. The girl clung to him, her face pressed to his back, her hair whipping in the wind. Behind them, the chase began, the pounding of hooves, the flicker of torches, The cries of pursuit. There. Coming, she gasped, turning her head to see shadows leaping closer. I know, he replied, his voice taut with focus. Hold tight. He spurred the horse faster, weaving through sagebrush and mesquite, choosing paths only a man of the desert would know. Arrows whistled past them, clattering off stone. A rifle cracked, the shot echoing like thunder. The horse jolted but kept. Running, muscles straining, foam flecking its mouth, the girl's heart hammered in her chest. Every shadow looked like death, every sound a signal that their promise might be cut short before it ever began. Yet even in her terror, she felt the steadiness of the man before her, the strength in his frame, the certainty in his movements. He was her anchor, her shield, her chosen future. The desert night became a blur of flight and fear. They splashed. Through shallow streams, leapt fallen logs, climbed ridges with pursuers always just behind. The girl prayed with every breath, not to the God her father invoked at supper, nor to the spirits her lover's people honored, but simply to the stars themselves, that they would not let this promise die. At last, they crested a rise and saw. Before them the dark shimmer of a river swollen from storm water. Its current roared, swollen and fierce, a barrier between them and the open mesas beyond. He reined in, breathing hard, eyes fixed on the churning water. Behind them, the glow of torches grew nearer, voices rising like the wail of hungry wolves. The girl's hands trembled on his waist. We can't, she whispered, staring at the river. It's too strong. He turned his head, his profile sharp against the moon. His voice was steady, resolute. We must. The land behind us holds nothing but death. The land ahead, it may yet hold life. And with that, he urged the horse forward, down the slope toward the raging current as the chase closed in behind them. The roar of the river filled the night like the voice of an angry god. Moonlight struck the surface, breaking into shards of silver as the swollen current surged past, foaming and violent. The girl clung tighter to him, her eyes wide as the water. Thundered over rocks, swirling into dark eddies that could swallow a horse whole. Behind them came the sound of pursuit, the crack of branches, the pounding of hooves, the shouts of men who meant to tear them apart. Her father's voice rose. Above the chaos, harsh and furious, a voice that had once guided her childhood and now hunted her like prey. From another direction came the war cries of Apache riders, fierce and sharp, their anger burning hotter than torchlight. Caught between two worlds, with neither offering mercy, the lovers had only one path left, forward. The warrior drew a sharp breath, his eyes locked on the rushing water. He spoke without turning. Hold tight. Do not let go, no matter what happens. She wrapped her arms around him, pressing her cheek to his back. I trust you, she whispered, though her heart thundered with terror. He spurred the horse. The animal hesitated, snorting in fear, hooves pawing at the bank. Then, with a second kick and a fierce shout, it plunged into the current. The water struck like a wall, icy and merciless. The girl gasped as it surged up her legs, soaking her skirts, dragging at her like claws. The horse floundered but pushed forward, muscles straining against the torrent. Spray stung her face, blinding her as she clung to him with all her strength. Voices cried out, some urging them back, some calling for their blood. Arrows hissed into the water, vanishing into the dark. A rifle shot cracked, and a plume of spray leapt inches from the horse's flank. The current swallowed the noise, but the danger was ever at their backs. The horse fought for every step. The river surged higher, pulling them downstream, threatening to tear them away. The girl's fingers ached where she gripped his waist. At one moment she felt herself sliding, slipping sideways into the current's hungry pull. Panic surged in her chest until his arm hooked firmly around her, steadying her. holding her against him with an iron strength. "I will not let you go." He shouted over the roar, his voice fierce with more than determination. It was the voice of a vow, of the promise he had sworn beneath the cottonwood. But the river cared nothing for promises. A sudden swell crashed into them, nearly toppling. The horse, the animal screamed, half swimming, half sinking. The girl choked on a mouthful of river water, her lungs burning. She buried her face into his shoulder, refusing to release her grip. If they drowned, they would drown together, step by agonizing step. The horse pressed forward. The far bank loomed ahead dark, lined with willows bent low by the current. It seemed impossibly far, a dream glimpsed through storm. And yet, with every lunge, every shuddering push, the dream grew closer. She dared to lift her head. Through the spray and darkness, she saw the opposite shore rising only yards away. Hope flared blinding, desperate hope. But hope was fragile. A voice rang out behind them, sharp and furious, her father's voice, carrying over the torrent. "Come back," he bellowed. "Damn you, girl! Come back before you destroy us all." The words struck her like a blow. For the briefest heartbeat, she faltered, her body trembling with doubt. Was she destroying her family, betraying the blood that raised her? Could love truly be worth this madness? Sensing her hesitation, the warrior twisted his head, his dark eyes catching hers even in the chaos. "Look at me," he cried. "Not at them, at me. You are mine, and I am yours. That is all that matters." The force in his voice shattered her doubt. She clung to him anew, her decision sealed. Whatever awaited them, she would not turn back. With one final surge, the horse lunged through the current and scrambled onto the far bank, water streaming from its sides. The ground was slick, treacherous, but solid. They had crossed. For a moment, they sat gasping, drenched, trembling with exhaustion and disbelief. Behind them, torches flickered along the opposite bank. Shouts rose in anger and despair, but none dared follow into the swollen current. The girl turned her face toward him, tears mixing with river water. He reached up, cupping her cheek with a hand as steady as stone. "We are free," he whispered, though his eyes still scanned the darkness, wary. For now. The river raged between them and all they had fled, their families, their people, the war that would surely come. Ahead stretched the open mesas, vast and unknown. A world without fences or borders, and though danger still shadowed their steps in that moment, on the far shore of the river, the promise they had made felt real. They had crossed into a future that belonged to no one but themselves. The river had carried them across, but it had not carried away the danger. On the far bank, the lovers sat shivering, the horse trembling beneath them, its breath steaming in the moonlight. Behind them, the torches of pursuit still burned, bobbing like angry stars along the water's edge. Yet none dared to follow. The current was too fierce, too hungry. They had won a fragile reprieve. The warrior urged the horse onward, away from the banks, into the shelter of mesquite and willow. They climbed the slope toward the mesas, their soaked clothes heavy, their bodies aching, but they did not stop. The desert ahead stretched vast and uncertain, but to them it was freedom, and every step carried them farther from the voices that cursed their names. For days they wandered. They followed no trail, choosing instead the paths of deer and the secret gullies that only he knew. They shared what little food they had: wild berries, roots, a rabbit snared in silence. At night they slept beneath the open sky, pressed close for warmth. Their love, tested by fire and water, seemed brighter for it. Every whisper, every kiss was an act of defiance, a prayer to a future no one else believed possible. Yet stories travel faster than footsteps. Back at the ranch, the girl's father raged. His daughter's flight with an Apache warrior became a tale told in bitterness and shame, passed from campfire to saloon, from neighbor to neighbor. Some said she had been taken against her will. Others claimed she had chosen her path, betraying her blood for the embrace of an enemy. Either way, the story grew sharper with each telling, feeding the hunger for retribution. In the Apache camp, the whispers were no kinder. The warrior who had once been a man of honor was now called traitor, thief of hearts, deserter. Some swore he had abandoned his people in their hour of need, choosing a pale-faced girl over the blood of his ancestors. Others, quieter voices, wondered if perhaps he had chosen something braver still. The lovers did not hear these whispers, but they felt their weight. Every shadow seemed to carry pursuit. Every gust of wind seemed to whisper of vengeance. They pressed onward, up onto the high mesas where the air grew thinner and the stars seemed close enough to touch. It was there, at the edge of a canyon vast and echoing, that their trail was lost to time. Some say they perished there, driven to the pier, brink by hunger and exhaustion, that the swollen river had spared them only to let the desert claim their bones. Travelers speak of hearing cries in the wind, of seeing two shadows standing hand in hand at the cliff's edge, staring west where the sun sinks into eternity. Others tell a gentler story, that they crossed into the mountains, found a valley, hidden from both rancher and Apache alike, and built a life in secret, that they lived as shadows, neither of one tribe nor the other, but of their own making. Children, perhaps, born beneath the wide sky, carrying in their veins the mingling of two worlds long at war. And still others, the ones who love stories best, say the lovers became more than flesh, that the river itself holds their spirits, guarding the boundary where one world ends and another begins. On nights when the moon is full and the cottonwoods bend low, some claim to hear a voice in the wind, a whisper carried across the rushing water. I'd trade 10 of my finest cattle just to hold you for one night. The words drift through the branches, soft as breath, fierce as memory. Lovers who hear them press closer together, knowing the cost of love is always high, yet always worth the paying. And those who come with rifles and anger feel the hair rise on their necks, unsettled by a vow too strong for death to silence. The ranches still stand. The Apache still roam. The feud between them carved its scars deep into the land. But somewhere, hidden in story if not in flesh, the girl and the warrior endure, bound not by fences, nor by blood, but by a promise that defied the world. And so their tale became a legend, not of cattle or land, not of war or vengeance, but of two hearts who chose one another when all else demanded they part. A legend told by the river, by the coyotes who howl at midnight, by the endless desert sky. A legend that reminds all who listen that love, though dangerous, can outlast even war.